Okay, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm very pleased to be back at the University of Edinburgh. So I will talk to you about gene editing and the controversies around gene editing. A few words on gene editing. You've probably heard about CRISPR-Cas9, which is one of the tools to do gene editing. And there are other tools like zinc finger nuclease or TALEN. But with CRISPR-Cas9, the discussion is that it's much cheaper and easier to edit genes than with traditional biotechnology methods. So I've put up a few terms. So when people talk about gene editing, they talk about gene scissors, they talk about the iPhone of biotechnology, and the word revolution often comes up. The technology is called very precise, very cheap, easy, efficient, etc. So what I want to do today is to talk about my work, which I've done over the past 4 or 5 years, following the controversies on gene editing. So I've looked at controversies in gene editing in the field of agriculture, but today I will more focus on controversies in the field of human gene editing. And what I want to do is to look at different spheres, at different sites in which this controversy is being discussed and negotiated. So the scientific community, I will focus and talk more about the scientific community, but also say a few words on how the issue is being discussed in the press and also on social media. I won't dig much deeper into theory, but I'm trying to mobilize and rework 3 bodies of work. The first one being discussions about responsible research and innovation. The second one being the issue of boundary work and demarcation. And the third one being in general controversy studies. And there is a long tradition in STS since the end of the 1970s and beginning of the 1980s to look at controversies, to look at science in the making and not science already done. So let's look at the first real visible and public episodes of the controversy on gene editing, which was sparked by an article which was published in the journal Protein and Cell. And this article reported on research which was being done on human embryos. And even before that article came out, because the scientists knew that the article was going to be published, there were already 2 articles in the journal Science and in Nature calling for moratorium on human gene editing. And quickly the discussion moved beyond the scientific sphere. So not only scientists were concerned about the uses and misuses of human gene editing, but also in larger media the issue of gene editing was being discussed. Like in The Economist, Time, etc. And even on Twitter, you would have comments and jokes about CRISPR, which shows that the spread and the wide scope in which, the wide spaces in which CRISPR was being discussed and hotly debated. So I've put down a few jokes. CRISPR is so powerful, it can edit its own history. Darwin had it all wrong. It wasn't survival of the fittest. It was random attacks by a Cas9. And so there was a huge and emerging public discussion on gene editing, and scientists quickly called for a conference, a summit on gene editing, and for the need to have a governance and coordination committee to think about gene editing. So, and that quickly happened. So at the end of 2015, the first international summit on human gene editing was organized in Washington. I think Emma was there. Were you there? Not you? Okay, you gave a talk a couple of years ago comparing this first international summit on gene editing, comparing this to the Asilomar conference. So you've got a picture of the room in which the conference was held. And just to say a few words on the general setting of this conference. So On the one hand, it looks like a traditional academic conferences. There are speakers going up to the stage, presenting, showing PowerPoint presentations, and talk for 10 or 15 minutes, and then there are a couple of questions. But the conference is also very much different from a traditional academic conference because of a couple of reasons. The conference was widely disseminated. It was filmed. There were discussions in the media, on Twitter. There were a lot of journalists present as well. And the conference issued a statement at the third day, at the third and last day of the conference. There was a statement being issued by the conference organizing committee. And so, as I said, the conference was organized in this context of quite a big and discussion on the uses of gene editing. So this was not only an event where to present scientific findings, but also to kind of police and govern and regulate this, and to show the scientific community also wanted to show that they were being capable of thinking and governing gene editing. And I wasn't there, but luckily the whole conference was being recorded, and so you can see the videos. So I looked through all the videos and analyzed in terms the words which I found most interesting. And one of the words which I will focus on today is the word responsibility and also irresponsibility. And there are a couple of speakers who refer to responsibility in quite different ways. So some speakers referred explicitly to the Responsible and Research Innovation Framework, saying that this was an interesting, productive, useful framework to offer guidelines to think about gene editing. People say, okay, the community needs to be responsible. And David Baltimore, so that's the second quote, who was the chair of the first meeting, who was also one of the chairs and organizers of the Sillimore Conference in the 1970s, he said, we are taking a heavy responsibility for our society. And so quite a few speakers made this comment that responsibility is something that you take. Without going into further details, without really elaborating this, so the remark is that the idea is that responsibility is something to grasp, which is there, which has to be taken. And so at the end of the 3 days, there was this statement being issued, and there were discussions about gene editing on somatic cells, gene editing on germline cells, and concerning the use of gene editing on germline cells, the organizing committee clearly said that it would be irresponsible to proceed with germline editing. And so let's fast forward 3 years later. So now we are in November 2018, and the second International Summit on Human Gene Editing is about to take place. But just a couple of days before, there was this video released on YouTube by a scientist called He Jiankui, and this really marks the start of the second big episode, important episode in this controversy on human gene editing. He posted a couple of videos on YouTube, but the one titled about Lulu and Nana, twin girls born healthy after gene surgery as a single cell embryo, is really the most visible and discussed and commented on YouTube. So in that video, He Jiankui announces the fact that 2 babies have been born, and that he had edited the genes of those babies when they were embryos. He said, I understand that my work will be controversial, and of course his work was going to be controversial, very controversial. But what I want to do is also to give a sense of how he presented and defended his research, and not look at only the responses and the reactions. So, as you see, He Jiankui is in his lab speaking to the camera, and this is a mixture of public confession, but also legitimization and explanation of what he's done. So he uses some words which are quite interesting. He says that, well, the whole procedure worked safely. He says that the pregnancy of the mother of the two babies, who he calls, it's a pseudonym, Grace, was normal, and that the babies are very healthy as any other babies. He explains that the main reason to do this experiment was to provide the babies an equal chance and a healthy life, because their father, which is called Mark, suffers from HIV, and he says employers fire people like Mark, doctors deny medical care. And he calls the babies a gift, beautiful and wholesome for society. But he does not only speak about the experiment he's done, he also historicizes and contextualizes this experiment. And he does so by mobilizing the story of Louise Brown, who is the first baby being born via in vitro fertilization. And he says, when we look back at this episode, there was also a huge media hype panic, but IVF made it possible to help more than 8 million children, and gene surgery is nothing but another IVF announcement. And his position on human enhancement is also clearly made. He says that what we want to do is not to do anything which resembles designer babies. Gene surgery is and should remain technology for healing. Enhancement should be banned. So what he does in this short video is that he narrates his experiment as being of scientific, medical, ethical, and social significance. He uses the comparison with IVF to de-dramatize and normalize his announcement. And the ethics he kind of makes explicit and articulates is what we could call family-centered ethics. He says he really wanted to do this for the family. And there is, as you saw, there is a really poetic and romantic and optimistic tone with talks of love and gift, and the mother is being called Grace, etc. So that's how he presented and narrated his experiment. And there have been a couple of papers who looked at the reactions in social media following his announcement. So there are discussions about the reactions on Twitter. So people have compared discussions on Twitter before and after his announcement. And what you see that before his announcement, the discussion on Twitter revolved more around the technical aspects and the scientific aspects of gene editing, whereas after the announcement, there was much more discussion about ethics, politics, and there are a lot of more negative comments. On YouTube, I did a quick analysis at the end of 2018, and I will show you a slide on that. So what is interesting that there are negative comments, but also positive comments, like the terms congratulations come up quite often. On the Chinese platform Weibo, the analysis has been done, which also looks at the different reactions according to different actors, government, professionals, journalists, lay people. And so if you look at the government and professional scientists, you see a much more positive discussion of gene editing, whereas lay people and journalists have a more critical reading of gene editing. And also you see, no surprise there as well, that positive emotions decrease and negative emotions and reactions increase after the announcement. And there have been also a couple of papers comparing different platforms in terms of their content, and showing that on Twitter discussions seem to be a little bit more nuanced than on Weibo. So at the end of 2018, I looked at the comments made on the YouTube video Hiji and Kui posted in November 2018. So what struck me, if we compare this to the reactions in the press and in the scientific community, is that there are, of course, negative comments, and with terms like irresponsible, unethical, unacceptable, etc., but also many positive comments with words such as breakthrough, hero, congratulations, Prague, brave, etc. There's a lot of emotional reaction with the term shame coming up quite often, and also calls for direct action that He Jiankui should be sentenced, that he should go to jail, which eventually was the case. And then with my colleague Frédéric Vergniaud, we also recently did an analysis of reactions in the press. So what we did is to use the Europress database, which contains a lot of media from Europe, but also from the US, New York Times, Washington Post, etc. But which is still centered on the Western world. So a problem with using Europress is that it doesn't cover the Asian world. So what we did, and this is ongoing work, we did the first analysis of reactions in France. So we searched the Europress database with the keyword He Jiankui by selecting either country of origin France or language French. And so we ended up with a corpus of 309 articles. And we analyzed this corpus of articles via lexicometric analysis or co-word analysis, which means we were looking for words which are used together to see the kind of arguments and narratives in those articles. And we use a software called Iromatech to do this. And what you also see is, if you look at the number of articles, you also see that the discussion is very hot at the end of 2018 and in 2019, but then there are gradually less articles over the couple of years that after the event. So then we end up with very flashy colors, as you see there. So this is, if we use Iromatech to analyze the whole corpus of words of these plus 300 articles. So what this shows is that there are basically three kinds or families of arguments being made in articles in the press. The green group has to do with the technical and scientific aspects of gene editing. So what is this? What is CRISPR-Cas9? What are its potential uses and consequences? In red, you see a set of arguments which are a bit more reflexive and think about the social consequences, the ethics, the legal implications of using gene editing. What has been done, how is it conflicting with current legal frameworks and regulations, how should this be avoided in the future. And the third, you can't really see much, I think. So the third family is about the news itself. So it has He Jiankui, Chinois, Chinese, twins, babies, etc. So this is about the news itself, the announcement made by He Jiankui of the babies. And so if we look at the words which are used in the press, words like forbidden, not authorized, ethics, etc. are very visible. If we compare, and I will talk now in a couple of seconds about the scientific community's reaction to the debate, what you see there is perhaps more discussions about the politics and geopolitics of gene editing, with journalists talking about the wild west of medical research, talking of a difference between good countries and bad countries. And also there is much more emotion and effect in the press and also in social media than there is in the scientific community. So it's a more dramatic discussion. And also a thing we are doing just right now for a paper, we are prepared for a special issue on gene editing. And so my colleague Frédéric Vergniaud, he's doing a quantitative analysis of, so we searched the Web of Science database with articles that talk about gene editing and that are published in the biological sciences only. Because what we did before is to look at different kinds of places, conferences, etc., or the press where gene editing is being discussed, but we also wanted to know how do scientists, how do biologists talk about gene editing? What do they discuss in their papers? And so just a few intermediary results. The first one is that if we look at across those 14,000 articles and across time, we see that there is an increase of terms dealing with the international level and the global level. So terms like global, international, world, etc. increase, especially before 2018 and after 2018. And also you've got terms like controversy, policy and governance also rising quite a lot. So let's focus now on the second international summit on human gene editing, which was held just 1 or 2 days after the stories about the twins broke. So there was a lot of discussion among the organizers also, because He Jiankui, he was originally invited to speak at this second summit. People didn't know that he was what he was doing. So the slides he sent originally to the organizers had nothing to do with the twin babies. So there was discussion, and people said maybe we should disinvite it. But at the end they said no, we should invite him. We should hear what he's got to say, and we should have a proper discussion and questions and answers. So they had to reorganize the whole conference, and they took He Jiankui out of the session he was originally meant to be in, and he had a session specially dedicated to He Jiankui. And that's Robin Lowell-Badge, who was chairing the session. And so the session, it was quite dramatic in a sense, because so before He Jiankui was invited to speak, Robin Lowell-Badge clearly said, okay, I can cancel this session at any time. I want you to be quiet and listen. We want to give He Jiankui the opportunity to talk and discuss. At the same time, there was a lot of noise. There were a lot of journalists present and photographers present. From the video, I think there was like 50 or 100 photographers so present. And he said, okay, we are in the context of free speech. We're at the University of Hong Kong, and it's organized by key international academic societies. And so we want to have a discussion. So please respect the rules, etc. So then he said, okay, now we have He Jiankui. And it took almost 40 seconds before He Jiankui came to the stage, and you could really get a sense of the drama, and people started to discuss and laugh, etc. And then so he finally came to the stage and explained what he had been doing. One of the words he used was proud, and that was taken on in the press quite a lot. That he said he was very proud of what he's done. So he presented he gave his talk, and then there was a huge Q&A session organized afterwards. But before the Q&A session, David Baltimore, who opened the summit, again came to the stage, and he said a few comments. So David Baltimore, again, he's a very famous and visible scientist in the field. He's been there at the Silomar, at the first summit on human gene editing, at the second. He's won a Nobel Prize, etc. He's also quite a controversial figure. There was a book called The Baltimore Case. But still, like he really embodies the scientific community at this event. So he comes to the stage, and he talks for 1 or 2 minutes, and he says, well, gene editing of human embryos would still be considered irresponsible. What He Jiankui has done was not a transparent process, and this represents a failure of self-regulation by the scientific community. And then after that, there are a couple of questions asked by the chair, and then the discussions open up to the whole floor. And so there are there's about half an hour, 40 minutes of discussion with questions, quite critical questions, which cover almost everything from ethics to consent to publications to what he's done to potential off-targets or off-target effects. And then at the end, again, as in the first summit, there has been a statement which says, at this summit we heard an expected deeply disturbing claim, and then the term which interests me, which I had, was the procedure was irresponsible and failed to conform with international norms. So the statement criticizes what He Jiankui has done on a variety of grounds. It has not been scientific, not been ethical, not been moral, not been medically necessary, because you can also use other techniques such as sperm washing if a father of a future child has HIV/AIDS. And so it really disqualifies and demarcates this experiment by saying what it is not. It has not been a transparent, rigorous, professional, and safe experiment. So we see a kind of threefold disqualification of what He Jiankui has done. His results are downgraded in a sense. They are not presented as facts or claims, but claims to be verified. The whole process is criticized, and the connection or the missing connection to existing norms, values are condemned. So in a sense, what this event does and what this discussion does is it really sets a clear, it really articulates and renders explicit a clear boundary between good science and bad science by calling this science irresponsible. So this is a demarcation which really protects, in a sense, the scientific community, which protects its moral authority. And by calling He Jiankui irresponsible, in a sense, what the scientific community is doing, it's really excommunicating He Jiankui. And there have been, after the event, there have been quite a few responses by ethical councils, by committees, by academic sciences. In Germany, France, etc., quite a lot of discussions and reports and official statements really condemning and disqualifying He Jiankui. At the end, at the beginning of 2019, he was fired from his university, and at the end of 2019, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. And what I find interesting there are a lot of things to say about He Jiankui and the whole discussion and controversy on gene editing. But I want to focus on this term irresponsibilization or responsible. And going back to what He Jiankui said in his video, he really says that he took on a responsibility for the future children, for the family. And he says that the boundary between enhancement and healing should not be crossed. But then for the scientific community, as we just heard, this was irresponsible science. This is science not properly done, and it's criticized on a variety of grounds. So how should we think about irresponsible research and innovation? There's a lot of discussion and definitions and arguments. There's a whole journal called the Journal of Responsible Innovation. And so what is irresponsible innovation? In a sense, it can be defined by what it is not. Irresponsible research and innovation is not ethical, transparent, interactive, responsible, inclusive, reflexive. That's one way to think about how irresponsible research could be defined. But I think we also need to have a more, in a sense, more performative or more positive definition of irresponsible research. And then the question is, what is irresponsible research? How is irresponsible research made? As I said in the beginning, responsibility is something which seems to be made quite easily. Researchers say we have to take responsibility. We are taking now responsibility to think about gene editing. But irresponsibility takes, in a sense, much more effort and time to construct as a category. So what is irresponsible research? So what I try to show is irresponsible research is something which is made, so it's a progress. It is performed via discourse in events like international summits on gene editing. So it involves various practices of qualification and disqualification. And so I would call this process irresponsibilization. So a scientist is singled out. A whole scientific experiment is scrutinized and criticized. And also by constructing this category irresponsible research, you also have calls for further action. So governments are called to act and saying, okay, this should be, we should avoid that in the future. This would be happening again. So in 2005, human gene editing was called something that would be irresponsible, and now this category has been made active. It has been rendered mobile and usable. 5 years later, so now we are in the beginning of March, and the third international summit, which is supposed to be the last. I think that's what I said at the summit. So there was initially going only to be 3 international summits on human gene editing. So the third and probably final one took place in London early March this year. And in the opening speeches, the organizers, the chairs of the event, referred to Hiji and Kui, and I quite liked what they said. So David Baltimore said, well, he came back to the history of the events, talked about the first, the second summit, and said in 2018, of course, we had the announcement that a rogue investigator had created children with altered germline DNA. It looked like international regulation had failed, but it turned out to be a single occurrence that has never been repeated. And there has been, while Denis Rubrikov in Russia had also announced that he was going to use gene editing, and there are clinics who use spare embryos to do human gene editing. So it's not that right, but that's not the purpose of what I want to say today. But I think it's quite interesting how he really singularizes Hiji and Kui and says, okay, this was one-off event and it's not happening again. And then Robin Lowell-Batch, who wrote also a couple of papers like being at the center of the storm, etc. I think for him it was also quite something. He says, well, I will never forget the experience of chairing this session in which he spoke, which was very dramatic. So at the whole conference, you had a lot of discussion about the use of gene editing on somatic cells. There has been a lot of discussion and sessions on sickle cell disease, because there's a lot of hope, and there have been very positive announcements of the use of gene editing for gene therapies. And there's been discussions that you can really use now gene editing to cure what was before incurable diseases. So notions like access, inequity, progress, important advancements are made through the whole event. And so very many promises and much hope, but also what you see from the comment before by David Baltimore, there is this politics of containment of the controversy. Okay, this was something that happened in the past, etc. But we've moved on. You can, in a sense, you can trust us. And then at the very end of the conference, so there was 3 days of debate, again, a statement being issued, and at the very end of the conference, there was another large Q&A session, which, there were also protesters outside of the event, outside of the location where the summit was. And so this is at the end of the 3 days. There was this Q&A session, and there were a lot of discussions, a lot of questions about Hiji and Kui, and a lot of critical. One commentator said, "Okay, we are all the scientists here are, in a sense, the mothers and the fathers of those those twins." So, and you could really sense frustration of Robin Newell-Batch, and he said, "Well, at one point." He said, well, remember, this summit has been a lot about somatic genome editing and all the excitement there. So where are all the questions about that? And then the audience and some people laughed. So you could see, despite these efforts of containing and framing and historicizing or moving the controversy to the past, the controversy around Hiji and Kui is still, in a sense, quite hot. Conclusions, just 2 points I want to make. The first one is to think about notions such as responsibility or irresponsibility as an active category, as something which is made, which is qualified and disqualified, And so the idea is to look historically at the dynamics of these words. And of course, there are a lot of discussions and important discussions about how responsible innovation should be defined, but I think it's also important to look at how responsibility and irresponsibility is being made, and the processes through which these words and categories are made. And the second message is a reflection about controversies, and this is pretty much work in progress. So there is a long tradition in STS to think about, to look and put the spotlight on science in the making, to look at research in the making and not science already done, and to look at the various actors and their position and try to think what makes things controversial. And I think that's an important approach to mobilize. But also, I think it's interesting to look at different sides and compare and contrast maybe different sides in which controversies play out. And I try to do this by looking at the press, social media, and the scientific spheres. It's also interesting to look at the temporalities of controversies. At some points in time, controversies might be very hot, very public, very visible, and then become a bit less visible, and then maybe resurface again. So it's not something which is very fragmented, or we can really capture by a snapshot in time. It's interesting also, I think, that controversies, things are controversial, and it's being reported, discussed, etc., in different kinds of media, and so also people try to disqualify people or contain and avoid this being a too huge discussion. But at the same time, I think you can never really contain controversies. There are always overflows, etc. So in a sense, what I'm arguing for is to look at the pragmatics also of controversies, the dynamics and pragmatics of controversies. And that's it for me. Thanks.